So today we're going to carry on planning our newspapers. We're going to decide the subject of the stories, decide the subject of the adverts, and consider the 5 W's: who, when, where, why, what. But before that, let's hear the next chapter. He soon got the fire going again with the flint and ate some more bread and cheese, washing it down with the ale in the flask. Then he sat and brooded, staring sometimes at the yellow flames, sometimes at the feather. The old man had been friendly and generous. Gunnar guessed he had left the bag for him, but it had been a strange encounter. The old man had known his name without being told it, and hadn't been surprised to hear Gunnar talking about Valhalla. And what did he mean about flying with the eagle to the land of ice and fire? Falling asleep like that had been odd too. Perhaps the old man was a sorcerer and had cast a spell on him. Now Gunnar tutted, angry with himself. It had been natural for him to fall asleep, and perhaps he had told the old man his name and then forgotten. And maybe meeting Brunhild was making him think everything was strange. The old man had come and gone, and Gunnar felt he should just be grateful for his help. But then he thought he'd better keep the feather safe, and he tucked it in his pocket. It was fully dark outside the byre now, and Gunnar knew there was no point setting off for Kaupang before morning. He kept the fire going as long as he could, and then tried to rest. He slept uneasily, his dreams filled with blood and fire, and woke feeling unrefreshed, his back aching, the cold deep in his bones. He finished the bread and cheese and left the byre, the old man's bag on his shoulder. It was a crisp autumn day, the sun bright in a blue sky. The track that had brought Gunnar to the god house carried on, and he decided to follow it, hoping he would somehow find someone who could tell him how to find Kaupang. The track skirted the mountains and took him through low, rocky hills. Towards evening, a shepherd told him he was already on the road for Kaupang. He passed the night in a cave, using the flint to make a fire, his stomach grumbling with hunger. On the second day, the weather grew colder, the wind full of snow. Gunnar came to a village where he used one of the old man's coins to buy oat cakes and goat's cheese from an old woman, who offered him a bed for the night in her cow byre. And on the third day, the track brought him to the crest of a ridge from which he looked down on Kaupang. He had arrived. There were hundreds of huts, the smoke of cooking fires rising to hang in a blue-grey haze over the thatched roofs. Narrow alleys wriggled between the dwellings. Several bigger buildings stood among the huts, one in particular larger than the rest, perhaps the hall of some rich lord. Beyond it was the harbour, broad wharves with dozens of vessels tied up to them, lean longships with their proud dragon's head prows, fat cargo ships, a host of smaller boats nestling cosily between the others like piglets suckling from their mother. Gunnar walked on and entered the town. The alleys were crowded, and everyone seemed to be yelling at the tops of their voices. Some spoke the Norse tongue, although many had strange accents, and there were plenty whose speech Gunnar couldn't understand. Most of these looked wild and exotic, men with tattoos swirling over their faces, warriors in pointed helmets, women covered in jewels. There were ragged beggars everywhere, crying out for alms. "Terrible, isn't it?" said a voice behind him. "It's a smell I can't stand." Gunnar turned around. A boy a little older than him was standing nearby, thumbs hooked in his belt, a grin on his face. He was wearing ordinary clothes and boots like Gunnar's, and had a shock of fair hair and blue eyes. The boy's grin was open and friendly, and Gunnar couldn't help smiling back. "Mind you, the old town stinks. It's not just the beggars," said the boy. "I hate to think what's in the mud of those alleys. My name's Gork, by the way." "I'm Gunnar Bjornsson." Well then, Gunner, son of Beorn, what brings you to crowded, stinking old Capang? Nobody comes here without a good reason. Gunner paused. It would probably be a bad idea to tell the story of what had happened to him. If he started talking about Valkyries and Valhalla, this boy might think he was mad, and a friend with local knowledge might prove useful. I've come to take passage on a ship, said Gunner at last, deciding to tell Gork the truth, although not all of it. I have to find my father. Well, you won't be the last to go on that particular quest. Gork put his arm round Gunner's shoulders. This is your lucky day. I know plenty of men who own ships, so there's nothing better to help you. But first things first, let me treat you to breakfast. You look as if you could do with a good meal. You don't have to do that. Gunner felt his cheeks flush. He didn't want Gork to think he was poor like the beggars. I can pay my own way. Of course you can. No offence meant, said Gork. He took Gunner by the elbow and led him towards the entrance of a narrow alley. I was just trying to be friendly. I know the best places to eat. There's a great tavern down here. Gunner resisted, a small voice in the back of his mind warning him to be careful. But he was hungry, so he let Gork pull him into an alley. It was fine at first, but then gradually the huts seemed to close in on them. Strange faces peered at them from the shadows. A mangy dog growled from a door. A rat scuttled over Gunner's foot. The mud grew thicker and smellier. Wait, said Gunner. Are you sure this is all right? Gork smiled. Nearly there, he said. They soon came to a place where another narrower alley cut across the one they had been following. Gork stopped and turned to face him. Is this it? Said Gunner. He looked around, puzzled. The alleys were empty, the huts shuttered and silent. I don't see any tavern here. Suddenly, two boys stepped out of the shadows. They were dirty and mean-looking and bigger than Gork and Gunner. One was holding a wooden club the length of a man's forearm, and they were both smirking. Gunner took a step backward. The boy with the club stepped forward, and the other new arrival moved to cut off Gunner's retreat. What's all this about? Said Gunner. I'm not looking for trouble. It seems you found it anyway, said Gork, still smiling. My friends are called Ivar and Niall. Now, hand me that bag of yours. No, I won't, said Gunner. Gork shrugged, and Niall smashed his club into Gunner's elbow. Gunner cried out and dropped the bag as pain shot from his shoulder to his fingertips. Ivar picked up the bag and turned it upside down, tipping a few coins into the mud. That's not going to make us rich, is it? Said Gork. You're turning out to be a real disappointment, Gunner. But at least we've got another way of making a profit from you. Well, don't just stand there, you two. Tie him up. Niall and Ivar wrenched his arms behind his back. Gunner cried out again, but Ivar silenced him with a punch to the gut, and he felt them tying his wrists together, the rough twine biting into his flesh. Then they hustled him away down one of the dark alleys, Gork following behind. Where are you taking me? Said Gunner at last, struggling to catch his breath. He was stumbling and splashing through the stinking mud, Ivar and Niall each holding one of his arms, and his elbow felt as if it was on fire. Why? To meet the king, of course, said Gork, laughing. Lead on, lads. Right, we're going to use this plan to plan your newspaper stories. I've put it attached to your email, or you can just copy the subheadings from this slide. And let's have a look through what we are going to include. So we're going to have the name of the newspaper, the date of the newspaper, the main headline, and then your main story, second story, and third story. This is going to be the big story. These are going to be sort of shorter little stories. And then any extra things like adverts, weather, forecast, price, and so on is going to go down the bottom there. Eventually, at the end of the week, this is what we're going to be producing. So we're going to have our name of our newspaper, our masthead, date and price, got an advert there, headline, your byline, picture with a caption. Now here's your main story, and then your second and third story here. So that's the kind of thing you're going to be looking to produce at the end of the week. So what are you going to call your newspaper? What date will it have? So the Viking Age started in kind of the 790s. So we're probably looking for a date in the 800s somewhere. What have we heard about that we could use for our newspaper stories? What do we know about Vikings that could allow us to write stories about the wider Viking world? So we could write some extra stories about things in the village. If you think about the village descriptions we did last week, we could, there's the boats, there's the blacksmiths, there's all kinds of things could be happening there. But also we know that Vikings were raiding Britain. We know that they were traveling and trading far into Europe. So there are various things that you could also write stories about. So have a think, what are your other stories going to be? So using the planning format, map out your story ideas. Remembering, don't forget your 5 W's: who, when, where, why, and what. So this is the notes for my main story. Scully killed Bjorn in the village. It happened last night. Scully had warned about raiders, but it was his wolfmen who were the raiders all along. The wolfmen killed Ranulf and Arna and burned the hall. Bjorn tried to protect Gunnar and Helga. Bjorn was killed with an arrow. The Valkyries came and took Bjorn away. So those are the basic points of my main story. But of course, when I write the actual story, I'm going to put much more detail in there. So you need to do that for the rest of your plan.